Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into those really complex, high-stakes stories behind major companies and pull out the insights you can actually use. And today, we're strapping in. We're going deep into the, let's just say, chaotic, near-death financial history of early Tesla. Our goal here isn't just to retell the success story everyone knows. We want to get past that, the mythology, and really extract the core lessons, sometimes pretty brutal lessons in finance, engineering, and pure raw risk management that allowed them to survive at all. We've got a pile of sources here detailing just how messy it was, and we're heading straight into that crucible moment, the 2008 financial crisis. But it really starts with what we're calling the impossible bet. Just picture this. It's 2002. The sale of X.com, which had become PayPal Nets. The key figure here, $180 million.
Right. I mean, for almost anyone, that's it. Set for life. Financial security. Game over.
Exactly. But instead, that huge pile of cash, it immediately becomes the seed capital for not one, but two ventures that were just astronomically ambitious. One aiming for space, the other trying to completely upend 100 years of car making. And both instantly put him on a path towards potential total financial ruin.
So what we're unpacking here, it's really more than just they made it. It's almost like a manual, isn't it?
It really is. A manual on how pretty much all the standard rules of finance and engineering, and then coupling that with this extreme personal risk-taking, how that became the actual blueprint for survival. Before we really dive into the timeline, though, we need to set the stage. We need to define the terms of this gamble because they were extreme. We'll be talking a lot about seed capital, right? And how deploying it basically determined who was in control.
Okay.
And crucially, we have to dissect this idea of the single point of failure. It's a risk strategy, but it's so absolute.
Yeah.
It literally put one person's entire fortune on the line. Everything.
And finally, we need to look closely at the top-down market penetration strategy. That was the whole business model, essentially. And honestly, it almost killed them right out of the gate.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that high-stay strategy. Starting with that foundation, which you called reckless decision to just ignore all the usual financial advice.
So that initial investment, the $180 million from PayPal, that was the spark. But what came next was, it was a deliberate, almost fanatical break from Finance 101. The scale of the risk. It's genuinely breathtaking when you look at it.
You talk to any investment advisor, right? What's the first thing they say? Diversify. Diversify.
Yeah.
Never, ever put all your eggs in one basket.
And yet the sources are really clear on this. He poured over 90% of his personal fortune into Tesla and SpaceX. Two incredibly capital-hungry dreams at the same time. This wasn't just aggressive investing. It felt more like, financial desperation.
Yeah.
Or maybe just supreme, almost unbelievable confidence.
But was it just about the money? Or was this commitment, this huge personal stake, also a way to control the company?
Oh, absolutely strategic. And this is where that single point of failure idea shifts from just being about personal risk to being a tool for corporate control. Think about it. Most startups, they spread the risk. They bring in multiple VC firms.
Right, which dilutes the founder's power but gives them a safety net.
Exactly. But by putting up the vast majority of the early capital himself, he basically cemented his position. He became the indispensable financial pillar for Tesla. If he walked or if he failed, the company likely failed. Now, that massive exposure meant personal bankruptcy was almost a certainty if things went south. But the flip side of that huge personal leverage, it gave him near absolute control over the company's direction.
And that leverage got tested pretty quickly, didn't it? You had those internal conflicts in 2007, 2008, happening right as the wider financial situation was getting shaky.
That's right. The sources really detail the clashes, particularly with the then CEO, Martin Eberhard. They disagreed on strategy, but crucially, they disagreed on engineering execution and the ballooning costs.
So when the engineering problems piled up and the money started just pouring out,
Musk, being the main financier, had the standing both morally and financially to demand big changes. He started buying out other investors who were getting nervous, who were looking for the exit. He increased his own stake, tightened his grip.
and eventually ousted Eberhard.
Yeah. By late 2008, Eberhard was out and Musk took over as CEO. This wasn't just a leadership shuffle. It was the ultimate outcome of that single point of failure strategy. His personal risk became this irreversible legal fact he had to run the company. His survival and the company's survival were now perfectly and terrifyingly aligned.
Okay, so the product at the heart of all this drama was the Tesla Roadster. It wasn't meant to be like a practical family car.
No, not at all. It was designed to be radical, a statement. It was this $98,000 luxurious two-seater sports convertible. It had to be incredibly fast, look amazing, and technically it was groundbreaking, the world's first production electric car using those commodity lithium-ion batteries, like the kind you'd find in laptops, essentially.
Its mission was bigger than just sales numbers, though.
Yeah. Oh, much bigger. It had one primary job: fundamentally change how people thought about electric cars. It needed to kill that persistent, really damaging golf cart image that EVs had back then.
Right, the idea that they were slow, boring, limited.
Exactly. So if an EV could do 0 to 100 kilometers per hour, that's 0 to 60 miles per hour for us in under 4 seconds, and go over 320 kilometers or 200 miles on a charge, well, that proved the technology wasn't just viable, it could actually be desirable, aspirational even.
Which brings us to that top-down strategy. Can you break down why Tesla deliberately went the opposite way of almost every other car company, starting expensive instead of affordable?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. Normally, you'd launch high-volume, affordable models first. You build scale, you optimize manufacturing, then maybe move up market. Tesla flipped it. The idea was that the high profit margin they expected to make on each pricey Roadster would fund everything else.
So Roadster profits pay for Model S development, and Model S profits pay for the ultimate goal, the mass-market Model 3.
That was the plan. Use the cachet, the exclusivity, and supposed high margins of the early car to bankroll the future. It sounds brilliant on paper. But the huge catch was it required absolutely flawless execution, which they definitely did not have.
And that's where these three major engineering failures came in, the ones that turned expected profits into huge losses.
Exactly. They compounded each other. First, the reliance on Lotus.
Building it on a Lotus Elise chassis, that was meant to save time and money, right?
Oh, that was the hope. But it ended up doing the opposite. The aluminum chassis was a decent starting point, sure, but stuffing in a huge battery pack, all the power electronics, the cooling systems needed for a powerful EV, it required massive changes.
So it wasn't just dropping in a battery.
Not even close.
Right.
The first to say Tesla engineers had to re-engineer something like 80% of the original Lotus parts. Things like the crash structures needed reinforcing, the heating and cooling systems were completely different. They basically paid Lotus for the shell and then paid their own engineers a fortune to rebuild most of it. Massive budget overruns from the start.
Okay, so that's one drain. Then there was the infamous transmission problem.
Right, and this really highlights a key difference between electric motors and gasoline engines. Gas engines, they have a torque curve, power builds up. Electric motors, they deliver huge torque instantly from 0 RPM.
Like flicking a switch.
Exactly. And that sudden massive twisting force was just shredding the original two-speed transmission they'd planned, which was adapted from what Lotus used.
They needed 2 speeds. Why?
They thought they did, initially, to balance efficiency at lower speeds with a high top speed. So they spent millions trying to develop a custom, robust 2-speed gearbox, but it just kept breaking under that constant, brutal torque load. It was unreliable.
Another costly dead end.
Totally. They eventually had to pivot, scrap the 2-speed idea, and go with a much simpler single-speed transmission. The lesson was learned: keep it simple with EVs, but millions in R&D for the failed gearbox were already gone, flushed down the drain.
Okay, and the third big engineering cost, maybe the most fundamental one.
Yeah.
The battery management system, the BMS.
Yeah, this one is fascinating because it was a huge initial cost, but it ended up being one of their biggest long-term advantages.
How so?
Well, the decision to use thousands of those small 18650 format cells, basically fancy laptop batteries, was driven by cost and energy density available at the time. It was a clever workaround, but it created this enormous, unique engineering challenge.
Managing thousands of tiny batteries all working together.
Exactly. Imagine trying to monitor and control the voltage, the temperature, the charging and discharging rate for every single one of those thousands of cells, all at the same time. If just one cell misbehaves, overheats, fails, it could potentially trigger a chain reaction.
A fire.
Right, thermal runaway. So developing the incredibly complex software and hardware for the BMS, the system needed to balance the charge across all cells, prevent them from degrading too quickly, and crucially, manage heat to prevent fires that took a huge amount of engineering effort and required totally proprietary circuits and code.
So while it was essential for safety and making the whole battery pack work,
it added thousands of dollars to the build cost of every single Roadster. It was a massive, hidden cost driver.
So you add up these three things: the Lotus rebuild, the transmission mess, the expensive BMS.
Yeah.
The whole financial model starts to crumble.
it completely collapsed.
Yeah.
Instead of making those high margins they planned with the top-down strategy, the actual cost to build each Roadster ballooned so much that Tesla was consistently losing money on every single car they sold, even at that $100,000 price tag.
Wow.
Yeah. Mass production got delayed 3 times. The Roadster definitely proved an EV could be cool, desirable even, but at the same time, it proved their initial financial plan was totally disastrously unsustainable.
Okay, so if the cars themselves were losing money hand over fist, how did they even stay afloat long enough to get to the 2008 crisis? The sources really emphasize the PR game, the cultural influence.
Absolutely. When your balance sheet is on fire, your public story has to be bulletproof. And this became a hallmark strategy. Compensate for the financial holes and production delays with overwhelming hype and prestige. Musk understood, maybe better than anyone, that he wasn't just selling a car, he was selling an idea, selling the future.
And a key part of that was getting those high-profile early adopters, right?
Yeah.
George Clooney, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Exactly. They weren't just customers paying a premium. They were effectively brand ambassadors, unpaid evangelists even. Their association instantly gave Tesla this aura of cool, of exclusivity, of being cutting edge.
Which generated a ton of free press.
An unbelievable amount. Coverage that would have cost hundreds of millions in traditional advertising. And the sources stress this was intentional. The early financial strategy actually relied on minimizing traditional marketing costs. They positioned Tesla not as some shaky startup, but as this technological icon, a symbol of progress that, yeah, only the elite could afford for now.
So the hype wasn't just a side effect. It was baked into the financial survival plan.
Completely integral. That perceived prestige, that cultural buzz, became the only reliable way to keep attracting the venture capital they desperately needed. They were constantly fundraising just to cover the losses from the Roadster. They were essentially using cultural capital to generate actual financial capital. It was a high-wire act. Okay, so now the story shifts from, let's say, chronic financial mismanagement to an acute existential threat. Tesla limps into 2008 with basically zero financial cushion. They're losing money on every car, and their entire operation depends on a constant drip feed of external investment money. This internal weakness made them incredibly vulnerable.
And then, boom, September 2008, the black swan hits.
Yeah.
The global financial crisis kicks off with the collapse of Lehman Brothers.
The impact was immediate and devastating for Tesla. First, the market for luxury goods, especially expensive sports cars, just evaporated overnight. Wealthy buyers slammed their wallets shut. That was Tesla's only market at the time. But even worse, the venture capital markets froze solid, just completely shut down. Investors everywhere started hoarding cash, fleeing anything that looked remotely risky. And for Tesla, a company whose entire business model was built on continuously raising risk capital, well, this was potentially a fatal blow. The money tap was turned off.
And the cash they did have just started disappearing at an alarming rate.
Plummeting. The sources paint a really grim picture by early December 2008. They were burning through several $1 million a month, and their cash reserves dipped below $10 million.
Which is like, what, weeks of operation?
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of payroll. They couldn't pay salaries, couldn't pay suppliers. And forget about launching development for the Model S, which was supposed to be their savior. It looked like game over.
And this is where that single point of failure concept comes crashing down on a personal level for Musk.
Absolutely. Remember, he'd put over 90% of his own money into Tesla and SpaceX. His last liquid cash was in there. And SpaceX was also failing spectacularly at this point. Its first 3 rocket launches had blown up.
So he wasn't just facing the company going bankrupt.
He was facing total, absolute personal bankruptcy, losing his house, losing both companies, everything simultaneously. The pressure must have been unimaginable. It wasn't just about saving the companies. It was about saving his entire personal existence. Hashtag 2.2, the desperate race for $40 million.
So the magic number was $40 million. They needed that much cash before the end of the year, December 31st, just to avoid liquidation. But the problem was, everybody knew they were on the brink.
Exactly. He went knocking on dozens of doors, VC funds, even established automakers, but the perception was that Tesla was toxic, a lost cause. Trying to save it was seen as throwing good money after bad.
So what were investors offering, if anything?
The offers, according to the sources, were humiliating, basically. Sell us the company for pennies on the dollar, or give us controlling interest if we put any money in. Nobody wanted to just inject cash and let Musk keep running his, what they saw as overly risky vision. They wanted control, or they wanted it cheap.
Which leads to maybe his most audacious move yet, the ultimate bluff. using his own desperation as leverage.
It was incredible, really. He realized he couldn't convince them with spreadsheets or projections. They didn't believe the numbers, so he had to change the game. He had to make it about psychology, about fear of missing out, and leverage his own willingness to go down with the ship.
The ultimatum. He basically got the existing investors, including Daimler, who was sniffing around, in a room and forced their hand.
Pretty much. He made an extraordinary commitment. He would put in his very last personal $40 million, but only if they matched it. He created this intense artificial time pressure. It had to be done by year-end, and the unspoken message was incredibly powerful.
I'm willing to lose everything I have left to save this. If you walk away now, you lose everything you've already put in. Andy, you might miss out on the biggest comeback story ever.
Exactly. He was selling sheer faith, backed by the credible threat of his own financial self-immolation. It was high-stakes poker. And it's worth mentioning the financial mechanics here quickly. It wasn't just about wiring cash. They used these things called convertible notes. These were essentially loans that the company already owed to these investors.
Okay.
So the deal involved injecting some new cash, yes, but also converting these existing debts, these convertible notes, into equity, into ownership shares in the company. This was clever because it brought in the needed capital without having to formally declare a rock-bottom valuation for Tesla right in the middle of the financial crisis, which would have hurt their ability to raise money later.
Got it. So it recapitalized the company using existing debt plus new cash. Hashtag 2.3, Christmas Eve climax. And the sources describe the absolute peak of this drama happening on Christmas Eve 2008. December 24th was a hard deadline set by the board, by creditors. This wasn't just a suggestion. The accounts would be frozen if they didn't get the deal done.
The logistics sound completely insane. You've got the finance team scrambling, working across Palo Alto, London, Stuttgart, 3 different continents, while literally everyone else is shutting down for Christmas. Every single signature, every legal document had to be finalized before midnight California time, or the company would effectively cease to exist on Christmas Day.
And the rescue package, the $40 million, it actually came through. The Christmas miracle.
It did, just hours before the deadline, late on Christmas Eve. The structure was key. It was that consortium of existing investors, crucially anchored by Musk putting in his last dollars, and that move essentially forced the others to convert their notes and add enough cash to hit the target. Daimler's strategic investment happened around this time too, which helped with credibility, but this immediate survival depended on Musk forcing the hand of the existing group.
So they were saved literally hours before the lights went out.
Yeah. The famous email Musk sent out that day, just "we survived," apparently masked the sheer terror and relief of that moment. This deal didn't just save the company, it saved Musk personally from official bankruptcy.
So the big, painful lesson learned right there in the fire of 2008 was crystal clear. Relying on outsiders is dangerous.
Totally fatal, potentially, depending on external suppliers like Lotus for core components, depending on external venture capital for your very survival. It almost killed them.
That must have fundamentally changed their thinking.
Absolutely. The trauma of nearly dying forced this huge strategic shift. If Tesla was going to make it long-term, it had to control its own destiny. It had to become, as much as possible, vertically integrated. Control every critical step yourself, so you're not vulnerable to the whims of suppliers or the panic of financial markets.
Okay, so they survived Christmas 2008 by the skin of their teeth. Musk must have immediately known the Roadster model financially was broken. Great for headlines, terrible for the bottom line.
Exactly. The hard-won lesson was, the Roadster proved the concept of a desirable EV, but its reliance on the Lotus platform and those negative margins made it a completely unsustainable foundation. They couldn't build a real car company on that. They had to pivot hard and fast.
Even though they were still recovering from near bankruptcy and probably had very little cash.
Right. Despite the catastrophic losses and the near-death experience, they immediately started pouring resources into developing the Model S. This was an even bigger gamble than the Roadster.
Because the ambition was just so much higher.
Astronomical, especially coming out of the crisis. The goal wasn't just let's make an electric sedan. It was let's make a car that's fundamentally better than the best gasoline sedans out there. They were targeting the Mercedes S-Class for luxury and space and BMW for driving dynamics.
So jumping from a niche sports car straight into the deep end, the premium sedan market, against the German giants.
Precisely. This was the next phase of that top-down strategy. moving to a segment with higher potential volume than the Roadster, still premium, still hopefully high margin, to generate the serious cash flow needed to eventually fund the mass market Model 3. But the real revolution wasn't just the car, it was the decision to build the entire system around it themselves. Hashtag tag 3.2, building the energy ecosystem. And this is where that vertical integration mantra really took hold. It became the core survival strategy, the foundation for everything that came next. The guiding principle was, if we control the whole value chain, we eliminate those external dependencies, those single points of failure that almost took us out in '08.
So where did that control start manifesting itself?
Well, it started with owning the core tech learning from the BMS nightmare and keeping that intellectual property in-house. It extended to manufacturing, building their own highly automated factories instead of relying heavily on contract manufacturers. But maybe the most radical public-facing move was taking control of sales and service.
Right, ditching the traditional dealership model that's still controversial today, but why was it so important for Tesla strategically back then?
Several reasons. One, cutting out the middleman meant they kept more of the final sale price, helping those margins. Two, it gave them complete control over the customer experience, ensuring it felt premium, high-tech, consistent with the brand, not like a typical car dealership.
And controlling the relationship directly.
Crucially important. They owned the customer data, the feedback loop. This allowed them to do things like over-the-air software updates incredibly quickly, constantly improving the cars after they were sold. Traditional automakers, insulated by their dealer networks, just couldn't move that fast.
Okay, so controlling the tech, the factory, the sale. But arguably the biggest piece of this vertical integration puzzle, the thing that really built a defensive moat around them, was tackling range anxiety head-on.
Absolutely. The supercharger network, this was the stroke of genius, but also a massive financial commitment. Building cars was one thing. Building your own nationwide, eventually worldwide refueling infrastructure, that was huge.
Especially when they were still scrambling for cash.
Exactly. At a time when money was incredibly tight, they committed billions to building this proprietary, reliable, fast-charging network. Why? Because they knew that without it, range anxiety would kill EV adoption. People needed to know they could actually use the car for long trips. This investment did something profound. It transformed Tesla from just being a car maker into being a comprehensive energy and mobility ecosystem. They weren't dependent on patchwork third-party chargers. They controlled the whole experience, from driving the car to refueling it.
And it created a massive barrier for competitors.
Huge. Suddenly, if Ford or GM wanted to seriously compete, they couldn't just build a decent electric car. They either had to rely on the still spotty public charging network, or they had to invest billions building their own network to match Tesla's. The superchargers basically guaranteed the utility and convenience of owning a Tesla in a way no other EV maker could match for years.
So it's like they took the lesson from the BMS, control the energy inside the car, and applied it outside. Control the energy supply for the car.
Perfectly put. Control the whole energy loop. Hashtag 3.3. The government lifeline and legitimacy. Now, all this vertical integration, building factories, developing proprietary tech, rolling out superchargers, it costs staggering amounts of money, billions upon billions. And private investors, especially after the shock of 2008, were still wary. They couldn't fund it all.
Which is where Uncle Sam steps in. This became a really critical and pretty controversial lifeline.
It really was. In 2010, Tesla landed a huge, vital $465 million loan from the U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE. It came through a specific program called the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, or ATVM.
What was that program for?
It was set up specifically to help car companies develop and build more fuel-efficient, advanced technology vehicles in the U.S. For Tesla, this loan was absolutely crucial. It provided the capital they desperately needed to scale up production for the Model S at their Fremont factory.
But you could argue the legitimacy this loan provided was almost more valuable than the cash itself.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the signal it sent. Here's this company that was knocking on death's door just 18 months earlier on Christmas Eve 2008. Suddenly, the U.S. government is handing them nearly $500 million.
It's a massive stamp of approval.
Exactly. It told private investors, hey, the government believes these guys are for real. They think this technology, this company has a future. That external validation was incredibly powerful. It was the catalyst that really unlocked the next big wave of private investment, convincing skeptical VCs and institutions to come back to the table.
Of course, giving taxpayer money to what was still seen by many as a luxury car company run by a billionaire, that didn't go over well everywhere, especially when other companies funded by DOE programs, like the solar company Solyndra, failed spectacularly.
Right. There was huge political blowback. Critics screamed it was corporate welfare, risking taxpayer dollars on a pipe dream, drawing constant comparisons to the Solyndra failure. It put Tesla under intense scrutiny.
Which makes what happened next even more remarkable, the repayment.
Yes. This was the ultimate financial comeback story and a PR masterstroke. In 2013, just after the Model S had successfully launched and proven itself, and after Tesla had gone public with its IPO, they paid back the entire $465 million loan.
And the key detail, they paid it back 9 years ahead of schedule.
That's the kicker. This wasn't just meeting an obligation. It was this huge public demonstration of financial success and responsibility. It instantly silenced the political critics. It completely severed the damaging association with Solyndra. It cemented Tesla's reputation, not just as innovative, but as a viable, profitable, responsible company that actually delivered a return on the government's investment. That early repayment bought them a level of credibility and public trust that no amount of private funding ever could have. Hashtag 3.4. The Model S success.
Okay, so the loan helped build it, the repayment secured the reputation, and by 2012, the Model S finally hits the road. And it wasn't just okay, it was a sensation. It really did seem to fulfill all that early promise.
It absolutely did. And its success was fundamentally rooted in applying those hard-earned, painful engineering lessons from the Roadster, but on a clean sheet design. The most revolutionary part was the skateboard platform, that flat battery pack architecture.
Putting the battery pack along the floor of the car.
Yes. By integrating this massive, heavy structural battery array right into the floor, they solved two huge problems brilliantly.
First, it opened up tons of space inside.
Yeah.
No engine, no transmission tunnel.
Exactly. Massive interior volume, plus you got a front trunk, the frunk, and a rear trunk. But even more critical for the car's performance and safety was the impact on the center of gravity.
Lowering it dramatically.
Incredibly low. Having all that weight distributed flat and low down meant the car had amazing handling, it felt glued to the road, and it achieved unprecedented safety ratings because it was so stable and resistant to rollover.
So the Model S really proved that an electric platform wasn't a compromise. It could actually be better than traditional car architecture.
That was the breakthrough. The Model S wasn't just a good electric car, it was arguably one of the best sedans in the world, period. Its success cemented Tesla's position as a real leader, not just a niche player. All those lessons learned in the fire of 2008, the need for proprietary tech like the BMS, the absolute insistence on vertical control with things like superchargers, those were the strategic changes that allowed them to go from being this interesting but nearly bankrupt startup into a genuine cultural phenomenon and a dominant force reshaping both the car industry and the energy landscape. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, so let's group it all together. After digging through this incredibly turbulent history, what does it all mean for you, our listener? Whether you're an entrepreneur, an investor, just someone trying to understand risk and strategy.
I think the core lesson from Tesla's survival really boils down to this extreme, deliberate combination of two things. First, you had that unbelievable level of aggressive personal risk putting virtually everything on the line. But it wasn't just reckless, it was used strategically as psychological leverage, especially during that 2008 crisis, to force others to commit.
Right, the ultimatum.
Exactly. And second, the near-death experience forced an immediate radical pivot. Away from reliance on others, towards almost total vertical control, mastering their own battery tech, building their own factories, controlling their own sales, and critically, building their own energy infrastructure with the superchargers.
It's fascinating. They didn't just, weather the 2008 storm. They seemed to use the sheer terror of potential annihilation as the driving force to completely reinvent their strategy, and in doing so, start rewriting the rules for everyone else in the industry.
That's a great way to put it. Their early dependence on outside partners, Lotus, VCs, almost killed them. It was embracing self-reliance, even though it meant sinking billions into things other car companies outsourced, that ultimately became their defining strength and built that huge competitive advantage, that moat they still have today.
Which leads us nicely into our final provocative thought for you to chew on. We talked about the DOE loan, how the government money provided legitimacy when they desperately needed it. But it was the early repayment that really cemented public and investor trust.
So here's the question. How much does a company's demonstrated financial discipline, not just its cool technology, but its perceived stability and responsibility, actually contribute to its cultural power and its long-term market value? Think about it. That perception of stability, dramatically showcased by paying back that loan 9 years early, maybe that became the highest, hardest to copy barrier for all the competitors who are still, years later, struggling to gain that same level of public trust and financial legitimacy. Is the perception just as important as the product? Something to think about.